All right, so welcome to this second session for our 2023 MACAE virtual pre-conference. Just as a reminder for a couple of things. So this is an interactive session. We love seeing everybody on their camera, so you can participate. As I know the presenter, when I've presented before, always appreciates that. So please just stay muted unless you have a question, then feel free to unmute yourself or put it into the chat. Marty has said he will take the questions as we go, so feel free to do that. So if you're going to get sketch forms, I will put that in the link to in the chat towards the end of the presentation. And please only submit one of those forms at the end of all of the sessions and by no later than October 13th. The session is being recorded and the presentation materials will be made available to you. And those sketches are going to be available until May 31st, 2024. So just a few questions for you to think about. So while we're during the presentation, what practices today might I adopt for instruction or my planning in my program? How can I share the information learned today with other colleagues and partners? And what do I do to understand the connection between quality resources, instruction, and meeting outcomes? With all of that said, let's welcome Martin here. He is...
Morning.
All right.
Hi, everybody. Yeah, as we know, like from our COVID days, that it's always nicer to see everybody if it's all possible than the blank screens. And as a teacher, you get a lot of reactions from students, and it helps guide maybe any confusion or any areas that might be exciting even. But it's your own preference. So good morning again and happy Friday. I know it's as teachers we look at Friday and really try to enjoy the last few hours of the school week. So and before we go on to break and then start it all over again. So again, good morning. And then I wanted to preface with a couple things about me, I guess. My name is Marty. I teach at the Kent ISD, adult ed here in Grand Rapids. I've been doing this is my 7th year. I teach ABE and GED. So I have one class that's just GED, and I have one class that's ABE and GED. So I have the low readers, and I have a lot of the higher readers. I wouldn't say they're high readers, but they are higher. And this information that I'm going to be giving you today is based on, I guess, 7 years of doing this and trying to figure out what is the best method to help my students get to where they need to be in math. They come in obviously with multiple backgrounds. Some of them finished freshman year of math. They did fine. Some of them can't remember what they did in 4th grade. Some of them are too old to remember any of this math. You look at the people that are a little older, and some of this is they've never seen it before. It's like, when did they invent all this new math? And I said, none of this is new. This is all the same stuff you were learning when you were in school. It's just that much longer ago. So my other thought when I was as I'm doing my math practices is I need to be able to assess them. I need to be able to assess where they are, as well as like moving forward. So I have everybody start at the same spot, and that's where we are. So I'm going to share my screen with you with this little presentation we have here. Yep, that's the one. And there's my email if you need anything. If you want any of these resources, I can always email you some of the stuff. I had the school buy me a nice big fat flash drive so that I have all the resources I need for all subjects, but all of it in a digital form. My classroom is set up now in the last 3 years on a Google Classroom. We have Chromebooks in our class. We are really fortunate. We have a lot of resources, and we are the second largest in Michigan, adult ed. So we get a lot of that money coming this way. So we spend it on Chromebooks for each student has one in the class if needed. They don't take them home. They're the classes, and they can access all the information they need from my Google Classroom. So, but everybody starts in the same spot. I have hard copies of this stuff because we still have individuals who are not as comfortable, but with math, maybe on a computer and then copying questions and things like that, they'd rather just do it. And for the sake of expediting the information I need, I do have it on paper. So starting with this, here are the math reasoning from GED, these PDLs, they call them, the performance level descriptors. This is stuff you can find on the GED website. This is what they essentially are testing you on in math. And it doesn't give you specifics, but it does give you a general idea of what exactly, I guess, the general terms would be. So we start even kind of before a lot of this, a lot of the PDLs, because it needs be. But these all will fit into the type of information we're doing. So how to use these PDLs? Well, first, these PDLs are designed by GED, and this comes from, by the way, I sat in a conference for 4 days for 2 years, twice, so 2 different conferences with GED to get certified to teach the teacher. I don't know if they do that anymore, but this is the stuff they went over, and the idea was that teachers would help other teachers, and how about that? Here I am. So I hope this helps. But the idea behind the PLDs is, and I kept saying PDLs, the PLDs are to assess students' current, and that's the biggest part of this, I think, is to find out where they are. I mean, they come in with blank, and we don't know how their multiplication skills are, et cetera. And right away, you can determine where they are in a lot of these things if they, depending on how well they're going through some of the practices. But most of them are not right away ready to take a math test. There are a few, and usually they are individuals that are from other countries that have degrees from other countries, but not an American high school degree. So they're usually the ones that are usually quite ready to take a test sooner than later. The other ones are students, of course, that made it through school to the last semester and then they screwed up and whatever. So we know those stories, but those very few of them are ready to take the test right away. And then I try to give them a little perspective of why we're doing this, why we go through these steps. So the first here, get them familiar with vocabulary. We discuss that we don't use the word things like minusing anymore. Minusing is not a participle anymore. We use the word subtraction, or we can even say takeaway if they really want to, but we don't like using minusing and we use the word negative to describe a negative integer, not a minus. So we use -4 instead of -4, because again, those have 2 different meanings, and we're trying to get students to be on the same language. They understand right away that this is a vocabulary test all the way through. So we get into terms like the word term. What does that word term mean? And we discuss where we might see that, so that when they hear me say it, they know what I'm talking about. Then they can practice using it. And then, and that's another thing, is the idea that they are practicing using these vernacular. And then again, we want to build some confidence. I think the math is one of those tests. Everybody knows that these are the people that, this is the one test that requires you to have information, a building block. So for instance, most everybody can read, and they be able to make their way through the GED test, language arts test, or make their way through the science test, or make their way through the social studies test, just because they know how to read. Math is the different one. Math is the outlier, because just because you know how to add doesn't mean you know how to find the circumference of a circle or something like that. So it requires some building blocks, and they know that. And so we start from literally scratch, and I give them the very real the very real wake up call that this is the stuff that we start with is probably stuff from 4th grade. And they get it. And I say, but if you can do it, move through it. So I send them through the gauntlet, and it's called the gauntlet just because it's become that name because it's a lot of busy work. It is a lot of and it's at their own pace. We have students that are going to be able to blast through a lot of this stuff, and some students that are going to have to take time and need more practice. So the first thing I send them up with is they get an integer cheat sheet, and the integer cheat sheet looks like this. I think we've all seen it. And again, none of this stuff is stuff that I invented. So in case you're thinking how brilliant I am, this is not it, right? And I doubt that's so far that anybody's thinking that. So this is all this stuff I pulled from the internet, from the World Wide Web there. And this is the number one I use. Why? Because first of all, it tells you each just adding, subtracting, multiplying, dividing, the very basic concepts, and then it gives you a number line on top, which is great because for the stuff we're doing later. So they get this is their first sheet. We look through it, we do a few examples, and then they get their next sheet, which is adding and subtracting integers. First, they'll do a whole sheet of adding. Now, why is it called the gauntlet? As you can see, there's 30 questions or so here. They can probably get through this. Some people take them 5 minutes. Some people, it will take them all class to just get through this one. And that's where the real assessing goes. How far do we have to go through? How far do we have to work with this student? And again, everybody's different. So the gauntlet works like this. I tell them, all right, here's the first sheet, which is just adding, subtracting, positive, negatives. First, we're just doing adding. And then I can tell if they're going right away through the first column and they're doing well, then they're going to be okay. And I say, don't do the whole thing. My biggest thing is I'm not going to, this goes from my syllabus. I'm not going to waste their time. Their time is super valuable. They have jobs, they have lives outside of this. This is obviously one of the more important things in their lives, but this is something that shouldn't be a waste of their time. I'm not going to do things. I really emphasize repetition. So this is one of those things. So I don't make them do the whole thing unless they need it. And some people I can tell right away, let's go to the next one. So we go to the next one, and it's going to be subtraction here. Subtraction, no problem. Each one of these worksheets is from the mathskills.com, and they come with the answers. So the other great part about this is that each one of these has the answers on the back. So I give them this sheet, and on the back, there's the answers. Why is that important? Any guesses? This is the part we can all volunteer, chat. Yeah. Anyway, well, the idea is that I don't want to sit there and watch them do each one of these and say, that's wrong, this wrong. They can get immediately, they can immediately go through and get, oh, thank you. They can immediately go through and check their answers and find out if they're on the right track. Yeah, self-check, absolutely. And they can find out if they need to go back and they can find out also which ones are they missing. Are they missing when both numbers are integers or negative? Or are they missing when both one is negative, one's positive? What part? And that's the big part. And it's more for my benefit, I feel like, but it is to their benefit. That I don't have to keep going, is this right? Is this right? Now, some of them, the real funny part is they don't want to look at the answers because they feel like they're cheating. And I'm like, it's okay to cheat. That's fine. Go ahead and cheat. This is not for a test. This is for an assessment. This is so I know to move on. The next part, so they do this, they do subtraction. Let's see here. So they'll go through the subtraction one, and then they'll do one that is subtraction and addition. So they're going to do the subtraction where they use the keep, change rule. Another thing is I really, really want them to be able to, identify real world problems where we use subtraction of negatives. Now, very rarely are we going to use, you're going to subtract a negative from something else. I get that. But we use the keep, change rule from the very first sheet, which is here, to work through these. But if they can conceptualize, for instance, and this is why I have this slide up that I skip over. We have money, all of them bank. None of them check a balance book. That's pretty, I think that's pretty standard now. Nobody checks a balance book, but they have, because they can go online. I said, every time you swipe your card, the ATM or wherever, you're taking away. And I said, if you're negative, you're already taking away from what you're from a negative. So your negative is increasing. The value is decreasing. The number, yes, is going up as far as that's going to the absolute value. And again, we can talk about absolute value. We talk about how it can be conceptualized as lottery tickets, scratchers. You pay $2 for a scratcher, that's -2, but you win 5. So did you really win 5? And they can kind of understand, no, I only won 3. You're up 3, +3, -2 plus 5s, right? So things like that. I also use the dirt, digging a hole. So sometimes the number line is no good left to right. So we use the number line up and down. We can see this. If we're starting in the hole, we're starting in negative numbers. If we're adding dirt to a negative, the dirt is rising until we get to 0. Some of the things I explain to them is that maybe I want to break even in Vegas. I want all my drinks paid for, right? So I say, how do I get to 0? If I'm at -$5 or I'm -$100, how do I get to 0? And then I need 100, right? Well, what if I have 103? Well, now I have 3 more than the 100. And then we can kind of conceptualize. Again, that's where this comes into. And same with the now the next section. So after the can identify maybe as something that works for them, money, scratchers, digging a hole. We stop there and adding positive negatives. Now they understand the concepts. And then now the last one I give them for this is one that is adding and subtracting. This forces students to now pay attention to the sign. They weren't paying attention to before. They knew one page was all adding. They knew one page was all subtraction. And now they are working to decide, are they subtracting or adding here? Again, they all have the answers given to them. They all have on the back so they can check their answers to see how it goes. The next thing we do is we combine like terms. We start off, again, we acknowledge that, and this is my attempt to introduce the variable without people panicking. Students will see the letter or a variable and they will absolutely go nuts and go, I don't get it. What is that? I said, it doesn't matter what it is. All it does right now is tells us what are the like terms. Again, this is more sheets that I got from there. If you guys remember Sesame Street, they had the song of one of these things is not like the other. When you have 3 terms, some of these terms are not going to be like the other 2. One of the 2 are not of the 3 are not going to be like the other usually. And a few of them have the same variables. But this is it starts with 3 terms. Yeah, I wouldn't call it cheating either. I'd call it for that answer sheets, I'd call it using their resources as well. But it's fine. They identify getting answers as cheating. So be it. The next one, we'll move on to the again, these all have answers. Now, one thing I do mention to them that I am not going to be concerned when the answers come up and they have a number in front of the variable, in front of the term with the variable, even though we know that it's supposed to go in descending order with exponents and then one variable and no variable. And then, but what I'm concerned with their answers is that they do, like for the first one, have a +1 and a +7a. I'm not concerned about what order it goes into. Because the GED test is multiple choice. They're not going to have both answers as your as A and C. They're not trying to trick you on the GED. They're trying to hold you accountable. I always explain to them. So they go to 3 terms. Next, they'll go to 4 or 5 terms. Moving along. Now we get to 5 terms, again, conceptualizing, finding like terms. In the class, I advise them to box out the sign and the term that are alike, and then maybe even put circles around the other ones that are alike. So if we look at even number 3, number 2, I would have them circle -3, and I'd have them circle +4. But then I would have them put a box around +2R, +7R, and +8R. It lets them identify the like terms visually. If there's a third term that is not like the other two, you can use triangles. It doesn't matter. They can use highlighters, different colors. They need to identify that the letters mean that those terms are alike, and they can combine those. The other thing this is about simplifying. They again, the panic is, I don't know what R is. I was like, we're not going to find out what R is. We won't find out what Z is. We are simplifying an expression so that later, when we find out what D is, we can sub it in. But again, I talk like it's a house party, and we discuss, because lots of our students have gone to house parties, and we discuss how at a house party, not a lot of people are familiar with each other. So when you get there, you immediately go to your group. You find your group. And sometimes, as in the case of number 1, you get -3 gets the party and has no friends. So it just sits there alone and gets, and its answer becomes just -3, whatever the term is in -3. Now, the next part is you start working with exponents. Now, these terms get longer. They'll get to 6, they'll get to 10. I think I got them up to like 8. And again, sometimes I give them the one that has 8 terms. Mostly, I just want to see how they do if they're with just a couple more terms, keeping track. And that's really what this is just keeping track. I mean, really, they're only adding and subtracting little numbers. Now, we use the number line. We have that as our starting point. So we can, going back to that number line, I asked them to use it so they can. I'm trying to give them things that I've done to help myself in math. I'm not a math major by any means. I'm an English major. I would rather be teaching literature in the writing process. But, with the numbers, we just say, okay, you have -7. If you add, which way are you going on the number line? If you're subtracting, which way are you going on the number line? And that seems to be they can visualize that, or they can use things in the room. Like sometimes I have one student that uses the fringe along my the border along my board, and to be able to show me that they're using, that's how they use the number line. There's a staple in one that means 0. I don't know. However they got to do it, but it does get translated to their own. It does get translated to their own in their brain and conceptualized in the brain. Again, math is very conceptual, I feel like. So we have 4 terms. If this one's got 5 terms, and then we work to get to the squares. They don't know what the squares mean. They don't know what the cube means, but they are supposed to identify that one is that squares, like y squared, is different from just y, and v squared is different from y squared. So again, it's just them identifying positives and negatives and identifying the like terms together. Moving along, the last thing we move into, the next thing we move into is the distributive property. Any questions so far? Anyone? No? Okay. So
I have one question. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Marty, thank you. Do you have the cheat sheet in Spanish? Do you have one in Spanish or?
Oh, that's a good call. So what I have done for one of my favorite students, she's sitting right here. I had class today and they're taking tests. I have given them a lot of this material that I have in English. I've given them my Spanish version of the books to follow along. Usually it's with the bookwork. I do not have this cheat sheet in Spanish. I know that the Spanish is different in math than it is and it's the Euro Spanish, right? So some of the terms and some of the way the words are organized are different from regular Mexican Spanish and so on. So, but I don't have one. If I can find one, I'd love it. So far, I haven't had the need for it, but that's a good call.
Okay. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Math Skills, that website is free. It's awesome. The Math Skills with all the worksheets, and they give you A through Z forms of the sheet. So this one, like the one for distributed property, is I. And they give you, that's just because I want to give them something different. So I'll go to that. I have it bookmarked in my computer, and I'll print out those for students if they need more practice. Again, if they need more practice, we can always go back to that and get more. Yes, I'll do that when I get a chance. In fact, on the last page, I have the if you just type in mathskills.com, it'll pop up. But I will put it it's in the bibliography at the back. Because as good teachers, we borrow and steal from each other and from other sources, right? To find out the most. Good. Next time. Okay. The distributed property. Again, we're going through a lot of these, the associative property. That's what we get. That's what they're learning out of the combining like terms. They're learning the associative property. They can add in any order. They're now learning the distributed property, something they're going to use again later when they see more math. But we want to get them used to just identifying, like first we do it with no variable on the outside. So this one right here, obviously, none of these have a variable on the outside. There's a couple where the number you're multiplying is on the right side. That needs to be mentioned. That needs to be identified and discussed. Then there's also one where there's a negative sign on the outside of the parentheses. Another one that another one that pops up that gets questions, but I'm inviting them, what they might see. I'm inviting these types of questions. So they might see a negative and then they understand that that's a -1. Now they know, small steps. And then down here, I show you the compute the area. So this is one I've seen multiple times. They go, why do I have to know this distributed property? Well, then we look at the computing the area of a rectangle or a square and where this is common on the test, where they will need to use the distributed property and they'll need to know that they've seen this before. The idea is that I want them to be able to immediately be now this is usually like day 3, day 2, they're usually on day 2 or 3, they're usually on to the distributed property of this math. And again, everybody's going through this and they're going through it as fast as they can or as slow as they want, or taking their time as long as they want to take. So at this point, some people are ahead. Maybe they're on the sheet with a variable on the outside. Maybe they're still on combining like terms. And then we all meet up at the same point, but I still have students that are and this is for new students. We have constant enrollment in our school. So I have students coming in today. Well, I've been here since August, right? So that they're all going to get this as soon as they come in, and then they'll hopefully play catch up, or they'll just to where these classes that started the school year, but it never works out that way, right? So, but this is my way of being able to, again, evaluate where they are and where I can place them. This one is with the variable on the outside. So now they're inventing the squares themselves. We discussed, all right, when you added X's, you got 2X. Now, when you're multiplying these N's or these B's, B times B is now B squared. Now you know where it comes from. And so, and again, that's just a baby step so that when we get into exponents, they're not in panic going, oh, I don't know what these little numbers mean on the top. I really want people have a huge fear of math. And I think we've all seen it. And my thought process is to assess and get them unfearful about the things in math that shouldn't be fearful. Get fearful about, I don't know, the quadratic equation. Maybe that's what you should be worried about and not, squares and multiplying. Now, with the distributive property, we're also practicing keeping track of signs. We're keeping track of when we multiply our negatives and our positives. This is another practice. And I could have done a whole sheet where it was just -4 times +5 or something like that. But this kind of kills two birds with the one stone. And then that kind of is the idea. Again, more answers on the back. I tell them I'm not worried again about where which order their answers are in, as long as they have the correct terms with the correct signs. One of the teachers told me, or one of the conferences I was at, said she describes positives and negatives as matching socks. If your socks don't match, it's a negative. I'm like, yeah, it is, personally. I mean, if your socks match, they're the same, that's a positive. So whether they're both dark or they're both white, that's a positive. If one dark, one white, and it's a negative. So I think that does stick in their head. It definitely stuck in my head from the conference. I think that was at the Region 4 a few years ago. Again, the answers, and they can do all 40 at a, questions at a time, or they can go through and do 30 and go, I need to go to the next stuff. Any questions on that stuff? And again, I'm not trying to reinvent the wheel at all. This is what I do. It seems to work. It seems to at least get people to a point where like, I've seen this before, and we're trying to get them to get to math that they recognize, because most of the math they don't recognize. And so we're trying to, when we get into geometry, this is the stuff they're doing in geometry when they're calculating a circumference or something, or an area or a perimeter. When they're doing a perimeter, they're calculating combining like terms. When especially if there's a variable, they're doing area, they're distributing. So I want them to be able to understand they've done this before, even if because I don't know what they've done prior to coming to my class. So I want them to know that this is something that they're familiar with. This is not new. So moving along. Here comes the tough part. This is where it separates people. So this is adding linear expressions. So simplifying them first. So what they recognize right away is that, okay, am I multiplying this? Sure, I'm multiplying this because they see the distributive properties, but they see a few terms or a binomial, in fact, where they're not quite sure. So yeah, we discussed the distributive property, bringing the terms down. And then what are they doing? They're combining like terms, which is what they've already done. So this kind of encompasses all the stuff that they've worked up to, and it encompasses positive negatives. It encompasses the distributive property. It encompasses the combining like terms. So this is kind of where it separates people. Can they do this? And then we explain that this is an expression, which is different from an equation. There's no equal sign, so they're just simplifying. That seems to alleviate some of the tension. We had plenty of students that will, in past years, that would just get too frustrated and be like, I'm over it, don't want to do math. And it shouldn't be the case. It should be something that they could work their way through, but they see the big picture of math and they go, oh my gosh, instead of looking at the small picture and saying, hey, I can do some of this stuff at least and work my way up. So we do the distribute and combine like terms. Again, answers are there for them. And so they can check themselves. Let's see here. Now we have factoring. Sometimes I get right into factoring because we're like, we're already there. And sometimes I save it for another time. Oh, answers. All right. I save it for another time. But when we discuss factoring, we're looking at something that looks like the answer to what they did when they distributed. And then when they look at the answers, they realize, well, the answer looks like the distribution, what a distributed property is. So again, now we're dividing instead of multiplying. Again, at their own pace with the answers. There's another section of our math later that we focus more on this stuff, but this is the one where if we can get to it and we can find, especially if I'm trying to catch people up, really my goal is to catch people up to this stuff, because then I can get into algebra at least right away. And if I'm trying to catch people up, then I'm maybe more advanced students are factoring, but everybody eventually will do the factoring of expressions. This becomes very tough again when they don't know multiplication tables. And I think I'd say probably 10% of my students know all their times tables. I would say that's pretty on an average each year, about 10% know all their times tables, 1 through 12, right? Some of them are good up to like 6, and maybe they teeter off at 7 and have no clue about 8 or 9. But that's normal. So again, this will be very tough for those students. The advanced students who know the times tables, the 10% can divide. we look at factor trees, things like that, to discuss how to go about factoring, what this really means and why. So we get into rational expressions where they'll have to factor out, and I don't do rational expressions right this second. I explain to them again. I want to show them that this is the reasons. They want to know that, you know, if you're to put your objectives up on the board each day so your students know what today's lesson you're supposed to learn, I want them to understand what they're supposed to learn, why they're supposed to learn it. What will this help them in later? And then we get into the calculator. Now, after that whole section, they've graduated the calculator. Now, I don't care if they know their times tables or not. I say that I do care, but at this point they can use the calculator. They know that the way I put it is the GD expects you to know your times tables already. I'm not going to tell them that you don't. But what you do, you don't want to spend, you know, we talked about, you know, just technically, if it takes you 3 seconds to punch in a multiplication problem in your calculator times 50, I'm like, you're wasting, you know, 3 or 4 minutes for an extra question. So we want to, you know, I explained, get flashcards. Some of them went out and got them, but we've graduated the calculator. So now we're going to play with the calculator. And this is to do the fractions. And until this point, we're looking at probably 5 class assignments, class days, 4 or 5 class days to do everything up until this point. We get everybody, and of course, people don't show up for class, so they miss a day, so they're behind, and so on and so forth. So, you know, but if I have this gauntlet, I know where they are. I can ask them, what was the last thing you worked on? Because it's hard for me to keep track of where everybody is all the time. I'm sure there's a way if I took a spreadsheet and found out where everybody was, where they left off on, but it's more of a hassle. So I say, where are you in the math on the gauntlet? Well, I'm in combined like terms. Okay. And then they pull out the sheets or they pull up the assignment and then they can do it and they can work their way, hopefully getting to the fractions. Once upon a time, I used to teach fractions like it was 6th grade all over again, whatever. And we would find common denominators. We would work them out. We'd work on turning improper fractions into mixed fractions. I do that for the first half an hour of class, discussing what's going on in what this section, and this is from Steck Vaughn, one of the books. And it's the book I use primarily for the GD, primarily for math after the math skills. But after that, I felt like I was wasting time, and this is all about time. And I'm wasting time explaining how to do fractions, especially when they have the calculator. They have the calculator. Would I love for them to all know how to do fractions and do it by hand? Yes. Some of them ask me how to do it, and we'll go into depth about how to do it. But most of them, we just get right into the calculator and how to do it. My gauntlet can be given in one packet. Usually, I hand it out as they're going along. I don't want them to be overwhelmed with 4 or 8 pages of math. So I put the gauntlet in. I kind of give them in sections. So I'll give them the adding first, then the subtracting, because I don't want them also skipping pages. And because again, this is a formulated process. I feel like I need them to go through one page before they go to the next page, And they have a tendency to like skip and just start on the most recent paper I hand out. So I make sure they're done. When they're done, I hand it back out, the next one. And I have them laid out on my table, usually my desk, a handful of them, where I can just pull from each row, each set of papers. Hope that answers your question, Jim. So so I used to spend days on adding. My first year, I think it was, at working on fractions. It was a waste of time. Some are going to get it right away. Some are going to take some time, but all in all, when it comes down to it, you have the calculator. So we get good at the calculator. especially when I say you don't know your tensile handles, get good at the calculator. Fractions, get good at the calculator. We work on, and we'll start with a sheet of just, you know, a fraction sheet, these fractions. Punching these into the calculator. Usually the calculators you buy have a little cheat sheet card inside of them. I know mine did. And then like, yeah. And so they tell you what the keys are supposed to do. So we practice punching in these numbers into the calculator. The one thing I do emphasize to them is when we get into the fractions itself is the multiplying. I tell them how easy multiplying is. Look at that. We just multiply straight across. In 3/4 times 5/8, we multiply 3 times 5 and 4 times 8. Oh, that's it. They know at some point they're supposed to flip things and turn things and change signs. This is where they've heard it. They knew it back in school. They don't know when to do it. They're trying to cross multiply. So when we talk about dividing, again, yes, it is keep the first fraction and then multiply by the reciprocal. And I make them repeat this so they know the rule. We don't divide fractions. We multiply by the reciprocal. And then they repeat it again. So, and again, I have this analogy of the math god, where the math gods make all the rules, right? Well, they want you to go to heaven, but you got to follow the rules like every other god, right? But this math god wants you to, says you can multiply, but you can't, because it's so easy, but you have to multiply by the reciprocal of the next fraction. We will go through this one. Stefan has a student book and they have a workbook. We do both if needs be. We practice taking these fractions and we will go over how to simplify these or how to create improper fractions and multiply them or vice versa. But again, they have the calculator, and that's what's super important. And some of them get very good at the calculator, and those are the ones that are that do well in class in the math. The next step, is the ratios and proportions. They might be out of order with the book. But I do ratios and proportions again because they'll see it later. We work to this. This is where we work in creating proportions and working out problems to find their equivalent. This seems to go very well as long as they set up the equation correctly. And I think they show it in this example right here, right? The portion is 3/4 equals x over 8. And they understand that's where the cross multiplying comes in. And some of them like, I don't know if I'm supposed to divide by this number or multiply. I'm like, if you set up the equation correctly, it lets you know. And then we have this extra practice with the answers. Again, this is from mathskills.com. Same exact idea. I realize that some of them can look at some of these answers and go and come up with an answer right away. Some of them I'd like them to cross multiply to figure it out because later the answers will not be as apparent, such as they get 1/2 equals blank over 10. Well, some of them know that it's 5/10, but I want them to know why. So we cross multiply to figure it out and do the math that way. The purpose is so that because later the numbers get bigger, the numbers get, and these are all very easy numbers in the math skills. The purpose is not to challenge them in their arithmetic. The challenge is to get more practice. And so, and understand that these will come out in decimal form later. They'll come out with different units of measurement later, and they'll have to figure those things out. Percents. This is the next sheet we discuss. We go over. We work on percents. This is where things get a little tougher because we spend a ton of time on percentages because the first 5 questions on the math test, right, are no calculator, and it's them trying to convert percentages to decimals, decimals to fractions, and vice versa. Fractions to decimals, decimals to percentages, and then fractions to percentages, and so on. So we'll spend quite a bit of time on the percentages. This is week, this is the stuff I did 2 weeks ago, which was like week 5 or so for us. And that's just based on like the people that have been coming steadily to class. Some people, teeter off, and some people need more time on the ratios and stuff. We start losing the group, which is unfortunate, but it's the nature, I feel like, of GD, where I'm going to get them for a week and then I'll get them missing for a week. And then, but I know where they left off. And when I go through this process, I know if they were on ratios and proportions, then percentages is next. Or if they were on combined like terms, they, where they are, I know what's next after that. You can use any percent. This happens to be the one I use, this worksheet. I have more of them, for percentages. Probability is the next, because now they've gone over ratios and proportions. They know how to set up a fraction, but we do probability because they're also taking science at this point. They're also taking social studies. So along with mean, median, mode, this is the math I do next, because this is the math they need for the test they're going to pass. I assume most students will take the math test last. I assume that because most of them do. Most of them need the extra practice, and they'll admittedly say, like, I'm no good at math. All of them mostly say, I'm no good at math. Or the ones that say they're good at math goes, I'm pretty good at math. I just need some brush up. Cool. But they'll all need this stuff for the science test. They'll need the probability. They'll need mean, median, mode. They'll need the distance, rate, time. So there'll be one day in the middle where I stop. The gauntlet is already over. The gauntlet stops at combining like terms. And this gets into the math the basic math they need now. So we'll get into, we'll spend a special day on just like math for science and social studies as well. They'll find there. So they know that that's where they're going to see it. Again, I teach math twice a week. I go by subject. So math for me is Wednesdays and Fridays. Most of the time, the stuff we do on Wednesday, we're finishing up on Friday. I usually don't introduce new information on Fridays, just because it's them catching up. Some students are just starting a subject, topic, whatever, but Friday's a kind of a dead day anyways, which makes doing this presentation a little better, right? For me, at least. I only have a few people hanging out. So probability is another one, but they've done fractions, they've done ratios and proportions, so they have an idea of how to set up these probability questions. And then we discuss the difference in the 3 different types of probability. We have compound probability, and we have experimental probability, and then just regular old future probability, the odds of things happening. Conceptualizing this, I think the book does a pretty good job of showing you where you might see this stuff in real life. I usually don't have to go into the extra practice for this. It's only a couple questions about probability on the science test, and it has to do with the Punnett square. So we don't need to go to beat it to death. But again, we're looking at percentages and decimals and how to convert them. So they want to know what the percentage is. If it's 1 out of 2, what percentage is that? And they've kind of got a background in it now, and they have a calculator they can work with. This starts the transition to algebra. This is the first bit of algebra they see. They're no longer panicked because they have seen a variable before. So we go very basic, 1-step equations. Now, the very hard part of this, and now they'll see this in the distance, rate, and time, and they'll see this in the interest equals principal times rate times time. The problem with this sheet is that most of them, if they're got any idea about math, they'll look at this first question that says 2b equals 10, and they'll go, oh, it's 5. I know 5 equals 10. I know that these, again, are easy. I explained them. I know. What I would like them to see, as I want to see them divide by 2 on both sides. I want to see that process, because I know that later they're going to get a number they can't recognize right off the bat. It's going to be a decimal. It might be a fraction, and they'll have to work it out. And I wanted them to know how to be able to do that. So as easy as this sheet is for most of us to look at and go, I know the first one's 5, I know the second one's 5, I know the number, or number 2 is 3, and all. I want them to be able to work through just divide, so that when they go to the next step, they know what to do in the last step. So now we're adding one extra step where we, in a very simple way, I discussed that, if we have on the board, I'll put like X plus 2 equals 5. And most of them will sit there and go, oh, it's 3. Well, how did you know that? Well, I know that, and then they'll explain. I said, well, what you're doing is telling me what you already know. So you're taking it out of the 5, and that leaves you with 3. And they're going, yeah. So I'm like, because you're subtracting. So they'll subtract from both sides. So it does help. And we work through these. Again, it looks a lot. It's a lot of work. It's not tedious, but it is enough work for they get the repetition. This is form A. I have form B, form C. Some of them want, 3 or 4 of these sheets so they can keep going. I explained that 90% of their algebraic expressions are going to come down to something looking like this. At some point, they will come down to just this equation, and they will need to know how to do it. And sometimes it'll look like it'll get more complex. This is where I am right now in my math class as we speak. Some of them have started translating, but this is most where people are. This just confuses the heck out of them. But when we look at it, we sit there and go like, what did you do last time? You divided to get the number, right? Well, again, we don't divide fractions. We multiply by their reciprocals. So they kind of understand this. But again, this is practice. This is doing it over and over again. I don't always go right into inequalities. But I can at this point. Most of the time I skip over inequalities until later. And then we get into creating their own algebra expressions. This is the next sheet I give them for algebra. This is their vocab sheet. This is what they use to answer these questions. So this is, again, not this one, but this one is all math drill. Oh, excuse me. It's mathdrills.com. How about that? Not skills. Sorry about that. Mathdrills.com. They get the questions, and they get another page with just the answers. Here's the answer page. So these are easy. Most of them, they kind of understand it. And writing equations is going to be super important. Math drills. Thank you very much, Patrick. So this is not super tough, but now they're using this is literally like translating. They're learning a new language that they don't normally use. How many of us have used the word quotient outside of class in the last, 20 years? Nobody. But they'll see the word quotient, and they'll need to know what that means. They start looking at the words multiplied by. So if you look, and then there's one that says like a number J multiplied by 56. Well, this is where we start getting away from the 56 and then the multiplication sign, the X times J. I tell them that X is confusing because now we know that it's a variable now. So we don't use it. So we discuss how to write it. So again, this is just simply how to write the equation. Again, same with division. I told them you're not really going to see that division sign too often anymore. You're going to see the fraction line. Something that we also go into as we're talking about converting. Obviously, when we convert fractions to decimals, we're dividing the numerator by the denominator. So that it forever is going to mean division, that fraction bar. It gets tougher, and it gets only slightly tougher, like this one. This is tougher. This is I get it, and this is again me assessing. This is most all of our. I don't give quizzes. I don't give personal tests. This is how I do my formative assessments, just by seeing how they're doing on this. How are they familiar with the word cube now? Are they familiar with subtraction? Subtraction's tough because there's a difference between 7 minus 3 and 3 minus 7. And the way you write it, there's a difference. A number 5 less than a number. Well, there has to be a number before to take away 7, right? So we explained that matters. I'm like, and this is a comparing thing. One of the analogies I use is, so when you get something like on this one, it was, let me find it. A difference between, a number S minus 82. Well, they might get something, the word than, which means you're comparing, which we discussed. That's in English also, your English arts. But your significant other before, if you're comparing your significant other now to significant other before, you're saying that one is different from than the one before. So there has to be something before to be able to do that. And then that's how they write it. Subtraction's a little trickier for students. And then this is kind of the start of it. And then we get into a bunch of other different ones going through Stekvon, but this is the very start. Again, with the mathdrills.com, there's 20 pages of just easier translation of expressions. Then there's 20 pages of a little more intense ones. Okay. Here's some of the credits that I thought I should, since I did steal from them, Sesame Street and so on. I know it's or a number reduced by, yes. Again, that number has to come first. So again, being exposed to enough vocabulary. I love it when they start using vocabulary or correcting themselves and stop saying the word minusing and so on. This is not, again, I explained, this is not the groundbreaking math by any means. This is not, this is just what I do. It has had a lot of success. I mean, if you have to pass the math to get the GD, I get about 30 graduates a year out of, I don't know, like, see you later, out of like, I don't know, the 90 to 100 students I get a year. And that's, I think it's pretty good. It's more than a few that around us. So I think it's pretty good, but I think that starting in this, getting them to be unintimidated by math, getting them unintimidated by big problems and variables and things, the things that they used to go, oh my gosh, getting away from the panic and just buckling down. I think that has been super helpful. Any questions about this stuff? The method, why I do stuff, or I don't know. And I'm sure most of us are doing a lot of this already. I just, this is work to start off the year. This is a great way, I think, just to get, I don't know, get their math brain working. We discuss in class, like, this is a muscle that has not been used for years. And they're going to have to, like, go into the gym, work their way back into it. And like the gym, this muscle is going to get bigger, stronger, and be able to do more than it did to start. And if they push through, they'll be okay. And that's getting them through that mental block. Then I think it's very important. Especially in same thing with, like, learning the language of math. It's vernacular they don't use every day, but I encourage them to use it every day, and use it with their students or excuse me, their own children at home, and be able to explain math to people. So we have to be able to talk in the same language. So when they use the word term, does that term? And I go, oh, that's awesome. Instead of using like that number or that letter or they use variable instead of letter. I think it's great. Yeah. So anyways, any questions? No. Yes. Hold on. I think you're muted.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Yeah.
Thanks again. I guess the question is for the calculator, because I know you
Yep.
have to train in that as well. So, like, there's a
Train
certain
'em.
mode to get those fractions. So how much time do you spend on that, or do you?
They now that they have the calculator, every time we do math, that's the first thing they got to grab if it's math day. So Wednesdays and Fridays they go. I have what they call like a calculator sock. I think it's back there on my board on my wall, and they just grab a calculator and then they sit down. And they're practicing. So with the fractions, it could be just a simple math skills sheet that they're just punching in numbers to get better at, because it is busy to do it on the calculator with fractions, especially. It's just like, second, ND, and then they got to translate it. So it's second, X10N, and then translate, which is great. And I learned at a conference how to on the calculator, how to change it from a improper to proper fraction to a mixed fraction, I'm like, oh man,
Yeah,
game changer for me.
I
Because
never started
most of
using it
us,
until I came
yeah,
away.
none of
Yeah.
us did. They're like, and even my older students, I never got to use a calculator. I'm like, you're talking to me. I went to a school they didn't let me use it until you were a genius and you were in the calculus class. So I get it, and I'm learning new stuff on it. When you get down to the math, there is only like 10 buttons you're going to use on the calculator. There's a lot of cool things it can do, but most of our students will never get to that. I also explain to them, I don't trust them. They want to punch in equation with parentheses and things like that. I don't trust the calculator enough to put in a whole equation and hope to God it comes out right, that they're doing the PEMDAS, right? So I don't trust that at all, because I don't know what it's doing. It could work out, and sometimes it can't. So I use the calculator to do small steps. So do the multiplication, do the division part, use it for your decimals and your fractions.
It also does the radicals, right? Like the
It does radicals.
Yeah,
yeah,
because that's
it does the powers, which are down the right and left side. So here's my camera. So yeah, it's got it all. Down here's on the radicals and powers and stuff. They'll only use like 2 buttons up top here for anything else.
I mean, it'll give you into the form of like, say, 3 times the square root of 2. It'll keep it in that form, right? Versus
It
giving
should,
you the
yeah.
whole, right?
Yep.
I think there's a mode for that too.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. It'll
Yeah.
keep it in the square root form, and then so when we get to radicals and we get into exponents, that's another thing they're learning, how to put in cubes and to the power of 20 or whatever it is, or how to put radicals into the calculator. That's what the calculator I told them is for. It's to do the busy work that you should kind of already know. You should already know your square roots and stuff, or squares even, but of course they don't, and things like that. But yeah, that's and the calculator I tell them is so important. I explain to them, like, if you can be good at the calculator, you can probably BS your way through the math test a lot of it. But again, you have to be able to know what and when you're doing. It's a game. I want to make it again into math is a game. If you know all the rules, then you know how to manipulate it. You're going to be the best at it. If you know all the rules of Monopoly, you're going to be able the best at manipulating it to serve your purpose. And as long as you can do that. So, yeah. So anyways, and then this is the most popular calculator. I think there's another one that you can use, but that's the most popular one. And sometimes it comes in yellow, which even more popular. I found this one on Facebook Marketplace. I was going to pay like $5 for it. And the girl heard I was a teacher, and she's like, here, take it. And I'm like, sweet. So it is my personal one that has my name, and they can't steal it, because I run low on these calculators. Somehow they just disappear, no matter how many I check out. Yeah.
Lori wanted to see the last slide again.
Yeah. Let me get that up again. I got enough of them.
And the presentation materials will be shared with you. So, but for now, you can view it again.
Yeah, math drills, the Steckvon book, Sesame Street, of course, and then GED.com. Now, the other great one for math in general, in case, is the mel.org. It's one of my favorites. Michigan E-Library has 2 practice tests that you can take. They're with the answers. So usually I give them that when student has passed the practice test, they're going to take a real test. They're like, I want to take one more test and just to see. And I tell them, put on math, go to mel.org and log in. It's free to them. They can take the test. It's pretty similar. If they do well on that test, then they can assume they're going to do pretty well on the real GD test. It gives them answers, so they can just right away check, or they can check at the end their answers. It's got flashcards. It has lessons. I think mel.org is like super valuable to my class, especially anybody that's trying to teach on a budget. So, it's free. So that's a real big one. And there's 2 tests. So you can do one with the test. You can do it untimed. You can do it timed. Yeah.
What's that link?
Mel.org, MEL.org.
I have a question.
Michigan E-Library. You go through the e-resources at the top, and then you go to high school equivalency, and then you'll find it through the GD preparation. They have it in Spanish as well. So that's good. I wish the GD was done in more languages. I have students that could do it in French and wouldn't have to battle. I have a handful of students from Africa that speak French from there at least. So they, I think but that's my other grievance with GD. So no, not for this forum. So I appreciate you guys letting me share and going over. I know we're a little over, but I went through it pretty fast. But let me know if you want any extra materials. This is just stuff I've collected over the years. I have 8 books I really work out of. Each one does, I think, a little better job than the next for stuff. I have some books that are from the 70s that I think are great for that I found that are great from like for like just algebra pure practice or just geometry. Yeah.
I think we had a
Okay.
question. We had one more
Yeah.
question from.
Yeah.
Yeah, just really quick. What the topic do you spend the most time? Is it like
In math?
algebra? Yeah, in math.
Algebra, 100%.
Algebra.
Yeah,
Like
and I explain that. I
equations
tell them that
related.
right immediately after we do the gauntlet. I'm like, we are going to spend at least 3 or 4 weeks just, so that's like, for me, it's 6 to 8 sessions just doing algebra. That starts from that goes back to just the translating algebraic phrases to, so this stuff, to going into actual like creating your algebraic problems given the verbiage, and then solving those equations. Because the algebra, if you can pass the algebra part, you're probably going to do okay in the geometry part. You're going to probably do okay in the graphing part, which I feel like that's the 3 sections. So if they can do very good in the algebra, again, they can BS their way through a lot of the math. And we're not working for scores of 200. We're looking for the 145 and more, and we want to have that buffer. But yeah, I tell them we're going to spend a lot of time on this. So because it's so important, and it's so important for if they decide to go to GRCC or in our school or MTech or wherever they're going to school after this, they're going to have to know this stuff. So I do spend a ton of time on that because I want to get to the geometry and not have to go backwards and go. And that's where this all comes from. This comes from me just going through the steps from a book my first year and going, they need some previous information before we get to this. And instead of me just going to it and going all the way back, I start in a progression so that when we get to algebra, there's no like, what is a variable? What's that exponent thing? I don't get it. Like all these things. I want them to be able to not have to go backwards. And if they do need more refresher on stuff, it's not a problem. We can always go back to that stuff. But the algebra we spend tons of time on. Yeah.
Yes,
It's the foreign language to them.
Yeah, there's lots of word problems
Right.
on the GD, and like some of the problems where you'll have to pick the right like equation. There's A, B, C, D, and you have to pick the right equation for that problem. And
Yep.
the way I do it when I teach the equation like 1 step or 2 step, I said, now I want you to read this and just using your words. So it's so 3 times what number will give me 27, for example. And then, well, it's 9, And then I said, well, then how do you solve it? And say, well, I have to divide. So now you write it in mathematical language. So
Yes.
27 divided by 9, for example, or divided by 3. So it kind of helps them to think mathematically and
completely agree. Yeah, and I really and again, like then we talk about in the GD itself, like from the GD conferences, the answers are there. This is the really weird test where they gave you the answer. It's one of those 4. So especially when we're translating algebra, and it's just like, which one of these equations matches this word problem? Well, if they can just pick out one little thing like 3 more than, well, then they know that's plus right away. And then they can eliminate this one, A, and they can eliminate C, and just have to deal with D, and then go, okay, I recognize that as a division problem. Do they say division in there? No. I recognize this as a multiplication problem. Yeah, they had multiplication in this problem. That's the answer. So again, they can kind of pick and choose. It helps them, and this is all subjects, get them down to 50-50 chance. Get away from the completely wrong answer, get away from the inaccurate answer, and get down to the okay answer and the best answer. And again, that's whether it's social studies, so science, where we really practice crossing off answers and getting yourself a better chance at passing. There's some strategies where we use working backwards. So take the answer that they give you and then put it back in the equation if you can. It's not always so easy. I think this test is designed so that you can't do that as easily, but you definitely can manipulate some things if you want and do that. Yeah.
All
Great.
right, any final questions or comments? Well, thank you, Marty, for sharing this information. It was very interesting. I hope everyone else will find it valuable. We're going on a little break for lunch, but we'll pick up again in about a half hour or so. And we'll
Awesome.
see everybody then.
Thank you, everybody, for coming. Have a good day.